Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. Today we are reading issue number 154, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. John is currently in the south of the United States of America, where he is in a town called Doglick, and he's here because he came to, I guess, talk to the widow of a man named Lucky, who owed money to someone named S.W. Manor, and John is trying to find out about that too. But he came here to pay respects to Lucky's wife, but upon getting into this town, he's actually run into Lucky's brothers, who are named Dickie and Richie. And they are not good guys. They have some kind of drug/pornography business. But John was able to convince them that he did not kill Lucky. Lucky killed himself. And I guess Dickie believes him. We're not totally sure. But Richie is still wary of John. But the first night John was there after he met them, they drugged John and did something to him. We don't know what. But there was possibly a naked girl involved, possibly their mastiff dog. It was all on videotape. That's all we know. We haven't seen exactly what happened. And then finally, in the last issue, John knocked on the door of a girl he used to know from back when she visited London. And I guess she met John when he was in Mucous Membrane, and she was a young girl from Doglick that had won a spelling bee. And I believe this is supposed to be Dickie's wife. I'm pretty sure her name is Rose. They haven't confirmed that exactly as far as her being his wife, but that just adds another, kind of twist to this, because apparently John has had some kind of sexual contact with Dickie's wife at some time in his life. So that's where we left off with John in the last issue, but we also left off with some hunters finding a big pile of animal poop, and inside of it they found fingers of humans. So that was where we left off, with the hunters finding that and about to raise the alert in town. So first things first, with issue 154, we got the cover. We see another motif of a map in the background, and then we get the inner panel that has John petting the big mastiff dog, and he's got a big smile on his face, and it's almost like he's posing for a picture. And then behind them is a chain link fence, and on that fence is a sign that says "Beware of Dog," and someone has written "Lick" on it, so beware of dog lick. And also on the cover, we see that this is written by Brian Nazarello, with art by Marcelo Fruchin. And as we turn to the first page, we are back in a flashback of when John met Rose when she was younger again. He is still in his punk jacket and stuff, so I'm assuming this might be the morning after their little tryst after that previous evening, meeting in the club. And they're walking together next to the Thames River, and as she looks out over it, we see, there's like Big Ben, and I believe it's the Tower of London. And as she stares out at that and the sky above, she says, "The sky's so different here." And John asks, "What you mean?" And then they turn and continue to walk as she says, "Well, like back home, the moon's so big, and all the stars, they just go on forever, like a glittering blanket. They make me feel small, but in a warm kind of way, like I'm part of something bigger." And John says sarcastically, "How abysmally poetic." But Rose doesn't like that, and she elbows John hard in the shoulder, and as John rubs it, he says, "What's that for?" And she answers, "Just 'cause." And we also see on this page that the name of this issue is Good Intentions, Part 4 of 6. So they continue walking for a bit, and then John smiles at her, and she looks kind of annoyed still, but John says, "That's a curious way to flirt with a bloke." And she says, "I ain't flirting with you." And then they stop and look at the Thames again, and John says, "No? Well, what's all that talk about the moon and stars? Very romantic." But she insists, "I'm not. You're too old anyway." And then John grabs his chest like she stabbed him in the heart with that comment, and he says, "Oi, now I'm mortally wounded." And she says, "Stop teasing me." And then John fires back, "So I'm the tease? Well then, be that as it may. Here in London, the moon is a dull little moth hole and a sooty rag that hangs over her, and we take our comfort in the fact that no one, not even God, can save a fucking queen what sold her soul to the devils, who are really running the show. And then John kind of leans in like he's about to make a move, and he says, and as for stars, well, we don't have any. Now, give me a kiss. And then John leans his head forward to meet hers, and she's just staring up at him like she's not sure if she's going to or not. And as we turn the page, we see she chooses not to because she pushes John away and says, no. And John looks kind of annoyed that she rebuffed him, and so he takes out a cigarette and he kind of walks away from her a little bit and lights it, and then she continues to look at the sky and says, John, is that why you want to be one? And John turns back to her and asks, be what? And she answers, a star. And then John leans on the wall looking at her, and she looks back at him, and it kind of looks like maybe she will kiss him after all. Then we turn the page and we cut to present day, where John is staring at the stars through Rose's window, and we're inside of her house, and she asks John, what you looking at? And John answers, Oh, nothing. And then she hands John a beer, and he says, cheers. Where's? But she cuts him off because she knows what he's going to ask, so she says, he's in the back, on the phone. And then John says, you look good, Rose. And I should mention she's wearing like tight jeans with black heels and a spaghetti strap top. And to John saying that she looks good, she replies, so do you. And then John turns to her and says, really? Well, but she cuts him off again, almost like she knows what he's going to say, and finishes his sentence saying, don't judge a book by its cover. And then John says, insightful as ever you are. And then John asks, so, you and the monster have any children? And she looks kind of annoyed by that, and she answers saying, no, and he's not a monster. You? And John answers, no, and he most certainly is. His daft brother as well. And she tries to stop John talking about them, saying, John. But he cuts her off and continues saying, and I don't want to hear about the pot calling the kettle black, or any of your other little colloquialisms. If I told you what we did last night, I'd... And then she cuts him off saying, I've seen the tape. And John asks, what tape? And then she has a smile like she knows something John doesn't know, and she says, wow, you were really out of it, weren't you? And then John puts his head in his hand and says, Jesus God, they were making a video of it, weren't they? And then still smiling, she says, of course, that's the point. Dickie? But he cuts her off saying, is a fucking bastard. And just as he says that, Dickie walks through a door into the room and says, hey, Johnny boy. And John smiles and says, speak of the devil. But as John turns, he sees that Dickie has a shotgun in his hands, and Dickie says, let's go. And then he proceeds to point the gun at John, and John says, hold on a minute, Dickie, old son. And Dickie says, don't got no time to hold on. There's been some trouble. And then he stops pointing the gun at John, and then he says, something goddamn real bad. Then we turn the page and we cut to John and Dickie walking in the woods, and John is saying, I don't think you know what you're dealing with here, Dickie. And Dickie replies, oh, and you do? Shit. But it doesn't seem like John is talking about their current situation. Maybe it's the situation with John overall, because John says, seriously, a snap of me fingers, and you're in a world of hurt. And Dickie's kind of behind John, but when John says this, he actually walks up next to him and shoves him with his body weight, and then Dickie says, snap, snap, snap. Look, Johnny, quit your belly aching, all right? I'm sorry we gotta go traipsing through the woods, but it's a goddamn lot quicker than driving. And then he passes John, and he walks a bit further ahead, and he continues saying back to John, I got some polish back at the house. Clean them pretty shoes of yours right up, okay? And then John says, okay, Dickie, okay. And we turn the page and we see them coming out of the woods, and there is a big fire pit where we see a bunch of people standing around, and on the ground next to the fire is what looks like the poop that was found last issue, and it has been like picked up in a newspaper or something and put next to the fire. Then we see Dickie's big mastiff dog run up to him and begin barking and jumping on him, and Dickie says, woof yourself, get down. And then as Dickie walks up to the people in front of the fire, we see one of them is Ern from the last issue, who was one of the hunters that found the poop, and he says, hey, Ern. And Ernest replies, hey, Dickie, he's back. And Dickie replies, you for certain? And as the big mastiff dog sniffs the poop, Ernest answers, hell yeah, I am. Can't be nothing else. Weren't running around the cemetery eating dead folk neither. This time, he ate a young'un. And to that, Dickie says, "Fuck me. Know who's?" And then an old woman in the crowd kind of looks at John and says, "Maybe. Richie went to fetch Mary Beth. Her baby girl went out gigging for frogs morning time. Ain't come back." And then Dickie looks down at the poop and he asks, "You found this urn?" And the guy standing next to Ernest says, "He stepped in it. I saw." And Dickie asks, "Where at?" And the man replies, "Up in the hills a piece. Not too far." And then the old woman, still looking at John, asks, "Who are you?" But John doesn't answer. Dickie says, "That's John, Althea. He's here to help." And Althea, who's been giving John a once-over as she's talking, says, "You that magic man Richie was telling us about." But John doesn't even pay attention to her. He just looks at Dickie and asks, "You mind telling me what the fuck's going on?" And Dickie beckons him over with a finger and says, "Come here." But we don't see what he tells John. We just cut to a little while later where they're still at the fire, but John is now standing by the poop looking down on it, and he says, "Oh, bloody Christ." Then we see Richie walking up with a woman, and she's saying, "Baby." Then she runs forward to where the pile of poop is, and Dickie holds her back saying, "Mary Beth." But she's not really hearing him. She's just in shock, and she says, "Baby girl." Then she falls to her knees and stares at the poop and says, "Oh my God. Oh God. Why, Lord, why?" Then she reaches out and grabs a finger out of the poop, and she looks at it while she's sobbing, and she says, "Baby. Oh, baby." And then she does something gross, but I guess, when you're in mourning, no one can really judge you, but she takes the finger and she kisses it. And I can't confirm this because they don't show it for sure, but we see her body thrown forward and she's in like a turtle pose with her face where the poop was. So I don't know if she's actually putting her face in the poop, but that's what it looks like as she wails. "Oh, she was wearing her favorite dress." So as that's going on, a man turns to John, and this guy's got one arm, it looks like, and he says, "We're being punished." And John says, "From the state of things around here, I shudder to think for what." Then the man turns from John and begins to walk away, but he's still talking to John, saying, "When the mine closed, nobody had no work no more. But Dickie, well, he had a plan. We all said yes. And now we're being punished." And as that man was talking, like I said, he was walking away, but John wanted to hear what he had to say, so John followed him, and he follows him to what looks like a little cabin, but John doesn't go inside of it. He's standing outside as this man goes in, and John is standing right next to a slaughtered pig that is hanging on some sort of contraption. Then we come back to the fire, where Ernest is asking Dickie, "What are we gonna do?" And Dickie answers, "What the hell do you goddamn think we're gonna do? He ain't getting away from us this time. I swear on a stack of goddamn Bibles." Then we cut back to John, who was just standing outside of this cabin, and then he sees a boy appear in the door, and the boy is drawn like maybe he's mentally disabled or something, but he just stares at John kind of blank-faced, and he's got a runny nose, and then John does a little magic trick. I guess he palms a cigarette, and then puts his hand up to his ear, and then he makes it look like he's pulling a cigarette out of his ear, and then he puts it in his mouth, and the boy thinks this is hilarious, and as John's about to light the cigarette, he asks, "And just what's so fucking funny?" But the boy doesn't say anything. He just waves John into the cabin as he turns and goes inside. So John follows the boy in, and as he comes in, we see an old man in a bed, and he's kind of bald and toothless, and he seems to be kind of in pain, and he's wriggling around, and he's just saying, "Oh, oh." But the boy walks over to him and kind of laughs to himself, and then he pulls the covers back and he shows John the foot of the old man, and there's a giant gaping wound on the top of the foot and going up to the ankle and a little bit above it, and it is filled with maggots. And John looks shocked at seeing this and he says, "Ew, here I thought me own sense of humor ran towards the dark." And then he looks at the boy and says, "You, my dopey little mate, might have me beat." Then someone appears in the doorway and they say, "John?" But John doesn't say anything, and it seems like the man knows that's John. So he walks out of the shadows into the light of the room, and we see it's Richie, and he says, "How's Horace doing?" And John answers, "If you mean this old bloke here, I'd say not so well." And then Dickie walks over and examines the foot, and he says, Looks okay to me. And John says, you can't be serious. And Dickie answers, sure I can. Them maggots, they're doing their job eating the rotten parts. Just give her another couple days. You'll be fine there, Horace. And John smiles because he thinks that Richie is lying to the man, and he adds a sarcastic, and dancing a jig too, I suppose. And Richie glances back at John, and he has kind of a side smile as he says, I wouldn't go that far. Listen, John, I need you to do me a favor. And John doesn't like the sound of that, so he says, and I need you to piss off, Richie. And then he turns to walk out of the room, and Richie follows, saying, I've got a problem. And John says back to Richie, you are a problem, you mental geezer. And then he continues to walk outside, and as he's about to walk into the woods, Richie asks, where are you going? And John calls back, away. From you, this place, all of it. I'm going away. And we see Richie's got a smile on his face as he kind of squints at John in the distance. Then we follow John into the woods, and if you know John, he's a city boy, not really accustomed to the woods, so as he's walking, he hears some rustling, which catches his attention, and then he turns because he hears something running towards him, and as it gets closer, John's got a big look on his face, but we can't see what he's seeing, and then as we turn the page, we see the giant mastiff dog tackle him to the ground, and John yells out, Struth! And then the dog begins to lick John's face aggressively, and John says, Jesus bloody Christ! Get off of me, you miserable drooly bastard! And then the mastiff backs up and barks at John, and John says, what? And then the dog barks again like he's trying to tell John something, and as John gets up, he says, this is fucking priceless, it is. Well, all things considered, it's probably not a bad idea having you around if there's something or someone in these woods that prefers human beings for its supper. As long as it's not you. Understand? Then we turn the page and we see John walking into Dickie's house, and Rose is asleep on the couch, and the mastiff comes in and it begins to sniff the ground next to Rose, but John holds his fingers up to his lips, and I guess the dog understands because he doesn't begin barking or sniffing or licking her. Then we see John walk over to a door that's closed, and he opens it, and we see a dark room, and he walks inside and closes the door behind him quietly, and then we see a TV in the room, and John pulls a chair up, and he picks up the remote, and he turns on the TV and hits play, and John sees himself pop up on screen, and he's on the ground, and he is seemingly drugged out of his mind, and we hear a voice on the tape say, shit, Richie, prop him up good. Make sure his ass don't fall over again. So obviously that's Dickie. And then we see another man come on screen, and it is Richie in full S&M gear. So he's got like a leather mask with a zipper on it. He's got leather pants on, and he doesn't have a shirt, but he has a bunch of leather straps that are wrapped around his body, and there's metal studs on that. And then he's wearing like Judas Priest style gauntlets with metal studs on that as well, and black leather gloves. So we see Richie pick John up and hold him up to the wall, and John is saying, that's a lovely mask. Assuming he's saying that's a lovely mask. And Richie says, amen to that. Then the dog barks, and Richie looks down and says, careful there, girlie. He feels any teeth, liable to bite your back. So I think what's going on here is there was a woman tied up outside earlier that night, and so I think what's going on is the woman is doing something sexual to the dog, and John is in the room, kind of drugged out, being held against the wall by Richie, who is in S&M body gear. And John is watching this video with his eyes super wide, and he looks like he's angry, and then he looks down at the dog, who I guess is walked into the room, and John is looking at him like, what the hell did you do, dog? And John is so out of it on the screen, we even see him like drooling from his mouth. Then John continues to watch for a bit. Then we see on the screen, Richie is saying, attaboy, assuming he's talking to the dog. And then John puts his hand up to cover his eyes like it's too much for him to see. And I guess the scene continues because now we see John, his coat is off, and it seems like maybe he's undressing. And then Dickie says to him, man, oh man, Constantine, all them stories you tell, I figured you was one hellacious partier. Well, you're fucking wasted, son. And then John watches himself say, what are you yammering about, Dickie, you silly twat? I'm fucking hardcore. Then we see John unbuttoning his tie and I guess walking towards whoever's on the other side of the camera, maybe Dickie, maybe Richie. he's got a big grin on his face, but he is sweating profusely and drooling still. And we hear Dickie say, "Ha ha, that's a good one, 'cause if you ain't, you are now." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.